How you guys all doing here? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live to you on June the 25th with some more NFL stories to get to on today's show. There's some pretty interesting ones, a lot of discussion ones that I wanted to bring up on today's show. We're going to start off with talking some more about the Brandon Aiyuk situation. He had a meeting with the San Francisco 49ers yesterday, so we're going to talk about how that went and what are my overall feelings around what that meeting could mean going forward. Then some rumors coming out of Dallas. Mike McCarthy apparently starting to get a little bit fed up with Jerry Jones and undermining him a little bit here with the lack of activity that we've seen out of the Cowboys. So I'm going to talk about that and when we could potentially see a tipping point with all the tension starting to boil over. Then we're going to get into some more off-season gradings, this time in the NFC East, with a lot more on this show as well. So as a final reminder, before I start off, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that tip and donations link, I'm able to see your question or comment, and that way I can acknowledge it, we can talk about it, and take the conversation in a different direction possibly. It's a massive help for this show and also the network, so if you would, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. In saying that, we can jump right into the first topic with Brandon Aiyuk and the San Francisco 49ers now getting another meeting underway. It's just really the latest chapter in this saga that has been going on. I feel like I've talked about almost every single instance or every single action that has gone on with this. You know, there was first the cryptic Instagram tweets by Brandon Aiyuk. Then you had the 49ers rebutting any sort of indication that they wanted to trade Brandon. Then you had the trade rumors around the draft when the 49ers pondered around it. There were some rumors that the Steelers were involved. The Broncos were looking at a trade. The Jacksonville Jaguars also were thrown around. That was all surrounding the NFL draft. But again, obviously nothing happened since then. Then most recently, what I think is one of the most interesting ones and the most entertaining ones, honestly, with the FaceTime call you saw on social media. Brandon Aiyuk FaceTiming Jaden Daniels, Jaden asking him, what's up, what's going on, and Brandon basically saying that they don't want me here anymore. It almost seemed like, it seemed like a joke, honestly, the way he was saying it, but Jaden asked him, are you for real? Is that, what's really going on? And Brandon Aiyuk said he swears that it is, and I don't know. You can take it however you want. I thought it's pretty, not intimate, but it was pretty real the way it just sort of panned out. And of course you could have taken it as a joke like most people probably did, but I just think that's another sign that just piles onto the reasons that we believe that Brandon Aiyuk, or at least I believe that this could be gearing towards an end real soon here. And that's where we get to now with this new meeting between Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers. Aiyuk has been holding out this offseason, obviously, in search for a new big contract in the wide receiver market. All the indications seem to be that Aiyuk wants a deal closer to what Amon-Ra St. Brown got, around $29 to $30 million. But the 49ers, according to other sources, are pretty set on $27 to $26 million per year as a salary. I haven't seen any updates since then about them trying to boost it up a little bit more. That's the last number I saw, so obviously that's a little bit too low for Brandon Aiyuk to accept. And what was interesting about this is that Adam Schefter of ESPN was on the Pat McAfee show a few days ago, I want to say, and he brought up the topic of this contract negotiation, and he said that with Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers, there was a time where they were getting close to agreeing on a deal, but then once Justin Jefferson got a deal and some of these other receivers got a deal, the talk sort of stalled a little bit, and Brandon sort of backtracked a little, and now is looking for a lot bigger contract and a lot bigger salary than originally what was planned out with the 49ers. And you can't really blame him if those sources do end up being accurate, because again, he feels that he has done enough to earn that, and the way it is going up, the way the wide receiver market is just shooting up more and more, it seems, with some other guys still coming, down the pipe, waiting for extensions. It is smart by Brandon Aiyuk to look out for himself. You can't blame him, like I mentioned, but that's what sort of happens, when you wait a little bit too long. If you're the 49ers, they could have done it maybe before Christian McCaffrey or before Juwan Jennings, or some of these other deals they could have got done, but they decided to wait a little bit longer. It didn't get done in the end, and now they're left trying to pay more, and they're not really too adamant about doing that right now, it seems. What's even more interesting now, on ESPN's NFL Live yesterday, ESPN's Ryan Clark revealed that Aiyuk actually had a meeting with the 49ers yesterday in which he wanted to set up himself. He requested to have this sit down with the team, with their personnel. I imagine John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan were there, and they talked it out. It seemed pretty serious, like a once and for all sort of meeting, a final meeting. I'm sure the negotiations were going on with Aiyuk and his agent up until now, communicating some things to Aiyuk, but now Aiyuk sort of, at least what I'm understanding from this report from Ryan Clark, is that he decided to just come into the building or wherever they had the meeting and have a final sit down with the team and tell them, this is what I want, face to face. If they reject him or they tell him that, he might not be in the right ballpark for what they want in a potential salary for him, they're going to sort it out. They're going to settle it face to face one last time. And that's sort of where the question pops up. Is this the last chance for the 49ers and Aiyuk to finally settle something out? Well, the meeting happened yesterday, so I assume something came out of that. There has been some other Instagram posts and comments by Brandon Aiyuk, and I haven't paid too much attention to them. I've seen them, but I'm going to wait until we finally get some more answers, some more reports, some more breaking news around this topic to sort of make a final, decision on what this could happen. I already kind of have an idea that I don't think this is going to get settled. I've been saying that over the last few weeks now with this whole contract situation. And more on what Ryan Clark said and the specifics of how this all went down is he said, and Brandon Aiyuk told us that he wanted to set up the meeting himself, and when he was sitting with the pivot, he said that he's taking these negotiations personal, that the way that they have negotiated with him, that the way they have told him why he's worth what he's worth, that has touched him. And he also said that Aiyuk wants to be in San Francisco, but he is comfortable playing somewhere else. A bit of interesting points to take away from that. The fact that he's taken the negotiations personal sort of shows why he wants to come in now, has requested this meeting, and wants to do it face-to-face, which is why I think this is like a final meeting, a final sit-down with the team and get everything out of the way face-to-face. No middleman to sort of relay the messages. You go in there and you tell them what you want, and if you can't settle anything, then you shake each other's hands and you move on, and that's that. We're going to just have to wait and see what comes out of this meeting, but also, another point that I thought was interesting is that the fact that he said he's comfortable playing somewhere else and that he wants to stay in San Fran, but it seems like the most important thing is getting the compensation he feels that he has earned up until this point. It is hard to argue with him from that standpoint. I mentioned before that I would have loved to have seen another season with him. If they had just one more year, obviously the contract doesn't work out like that, but if they had one more year, I would have extended him next year to just really get a confirmation of Aiyuk being the number one guy, but that is how the contract has worked out up until this point, so the 49ers just have to make a decision. And something else to just add on to that, to go off of Brandon Aiyuk saying that he feels comfortable playing something else, Ryan Clark, in that statement that I read, said that when he was sitting with the pivot, so obviously Brandon Aiyuk recorded a episode with the pivot, Ryan Clark, Channing Crowder, and Fred Taylor. I'm sure they recorded an episode, and whenever that comes out, more information will be released by then. But that was interesting because I saw that statement, and then I saw another clip on X yesterday while I was doing the research for this topic, and Clark also mentioned that when Aiyuk walked into that room where they were recording the Pivot podcast, he walked in with none other than Jayden Daniels. These guys are being too close. I know they're friends. I know they have a great relationship. They're former teammates. But they're acting too close, too friendly, going everywhere together. You saw an Instagram story of Jayden Daniels hanging out with Brandon Aiyuk. They're spending a lot of time together for me to not believe that they haven't brought up the idea of the Commanders being involved with Brandon Aiyuk, or now being more intrigued about approaching the San Francisco 49ers about a potential trade, especially with Brandon Aiyuk now holding this final meeting, as I'm interpreting it, with the 49ers. He'll get his answer, and if it's not something he likes, I feel like the Commanders are sitting right there. Jayden Daniels has been too close to this situation not to be involved in any sort of way, relaying that to the Washington Commanders. Their general manager, Adam Peters, comes from the 49ers, comes from that organization, so he already has a connection there. And I think they're in prime position to get that deal done with Aiyuk because they definitely need another wide receiver. I've been saying it, that Terry needs somebody else to complement him. I like Jahan Dotson, but for right now, he's a number 3 for me. To me, this is just Aiyuk wanting them to know firsthand what he wants and then getting his final answer. And if not, the Commanders, like I mentioned, are sitting right there and are chomping at the bit, really, to try to get their hands on Brandon Aiyuk. I love what the Commanders are doing. Does Jaden Daniels have this much influence already? That's a different topic. Maybe he does. Maybe he just is testing out the waters because he wants to have as much success as possible. And Brandon Aiyuk is a friend. There's nothing wrong with hanging out with him. But again, it just lines up too good to be true. It's too coincidental at this point where now Aiyuk's having these final meetings. Jaden Daniels is going everywhere with him. I think it's a little bit suspect. And like I mentioned, I don't think this deal is going to get done. And I feel like Brandon Aiyuk now is a main target for the Washington Commanders. Before training camp, I think something will get done, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is to the Washington Commanders at the end of the day. But that's where it all stands. The final meeting happened yesterday. We're going to just have to wait and see what happens after that. But keep an eye on the Washington Commanders. I'm telling you, if he doesn't sign with the 49ers, I can almost guarantee he's going to the Washington Commanders just because of those relationships. Let me know what you guys think about that. My predictions, and also, what do you think of this final meeting between the 49ers and Brandon Aiyuk? Leave your thoughts in the comment section afterwards. But in saying that, we're going to head to the first break of the show. And when we come back, some more interesting topics to go off of with the Dallas Cowboys and their head coach, Mike McCarthy, appearing to be a little bit fed up with owner Jerry Jones about undermining him in 2024 with a lack of activity shown in free agency. What does that mean for this team? When could we see a potential tipping point in this entire situation? We're going to talk about that more after this break when we return in just a few seconds.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows with 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Moving right along with the rest of the show and into our second topic, more on the Dallas Cowboys, a very fan-favorite topic here on the show, and one of the popular ones as well on that. This time, talking about the whole situation with the Cowboys. No contract extensions, nothing like that. More focusing in on the head coach, Mike McCarthy, and his feelings towards Jerry Jones. We're heading into a period now in training camp where you'd like to have most of your team complete. You'd like to have a good idea of who you can count on, who potentially is coming in, what new players you have to get integrated into the system. But with the Dallas Cowboys, not really much of that. No real players coming in. The contract situations, they are what they are. Are they going to happen soon? Are they not going to happen soon? The Cowboys haven't given any inclination of that being the case anytime soon. So now to focus on Mike McCarthy and what he has to sort of deal with now because of this entire circus going on around him, for a lack of a better term. Big picture, this is Mike McCarthy's last year of his deal with the Dallas Cowboys, and after last year's playoff loss to the 49ers, to the Green Bay Packers at home, I personally thought he was going to get fired. It was too much of the same thing, too many playoff failures, too much of the Cowboys having a great regular season and then just not getting the job done. I probably would have fired him just to get a reaction out of this team, but Dallas made it pretty evident very quickly that they were going to keep him. They clarified that right after the loss. It wasn't too long after that Jones said that they were going to keep him. And now you're starting to get a little bit of more of these rumblings that some people believe that he's entering this year as a lame duck head coach. Why is that the case? Why do people feel like that? Because of that lack of action that I mentioned before, the lack of signings, the lack of getting all your business handled with the contract negotiations, maybe making some trades. They lost a lot of people, and they didn't really, again, replace all the pieces that they lost in Tyron Smith, in Tyler Biotic, in Dorrance Armstrong. All these guys that were pretty much starters for them, they, one, didn't replace them, and also they have these the three main pieces of their team in CeeDee, Dak, and Micah. While Micah's contract negotiations aren't really up, CeeDee and Dak are the ones that are on an expiring deal, and you really haven't seen anything, any more updates on that point. And Mike McCarthy is now dealing with a lot of uncertainty with this roster, not really giving him a lot of opportunity to succeed in his final year, almost just sentencing him to a bad year, getting criticized all over every week in and week out because the Cowboys are just, in my opinion, not built enough to try and get another run at this season for another run at the NFC Championship. But because of the lack of action, because of this, it's not really sitting too well, according to reports with Mike McCarthy. And also with all the departures as well, you're left with this roster where it's a lot of uncertainty at this point, and that's the last thing you want when you're on an expiring deal. You want to prove yourself ideally, right? If you're Mike McCarthy, they're giving you another shot. Maybe in reality, potentially in his inner thoughts, he could have been thinking, yeah, maybe they're going to fire me, but he's given this second chance. He wants to go out there and prove himself, and the team's just not doing anything to really help him out. So leaving him out dry, in a sense, in another way of saying it. And now you get these other sort of rumblings from Tyler Dunn of the Go Long column, when he said he spoke with a couple of Cowboys sources who addressed Mike McCarthy's approach heading into 2024. And one of the comments from one of these sources on Mike McCarthy's contract, like I just mentioned, was at least give him a 1-year extension. You may not have to give him another 5 years, but at least extend them out 1 year and extend all the other coaches 1 year to give them a level of security. From that standpoint, just on that statement, I could sort of understand where he's coming from, just from a fairness standpoint, because, again, it doesn't seem fair. You want to give Mike McCarthy the best opportunity from just a moral standpoint, right, of being, I guess, a good person, but extending him 1 year, I just finished saying I would fire him, so I probably wouldn't have done that to avoid this whole give and take. I'm on your side, I'm not on your side. I say I'm on your side, but my actions don't show it. I would have just fired him. Realistically, just plain and simple, I would have moved on from him and brought in a new voice to try and get the troops rallied here. With Mike McCarthy staying in, again, not to say that he's incapable completely of changing the situation, but at the same time, how much more can you really change with the same players hearing the same message? And then Dan Quinn also moved on. He is the head coach now of the Washington Commanders. That defense is going to look different. You bring in a new voice, but is it going to be enough time to change everything and make it look good, again, on Mike McCarthy's final year? All these actions don't really line up with the timeline of Mike McCarthy trying to get the best results as soon as possible to just save his job. It seems like the Cowboys are planning long-term without him, and if they were going to do that, again, why not just fire the guy and just have a new voice in there and just move on from this, rather than having all of this back and forth, all these distractions outside of just playing football? But Tyler Dunn continued to speak on Mike McCarthy's feelings that he feels that Jerry Jones is sort of undermining him with a no-win situation this year. And Tyler Dunn specifically said, McCarthy's doing it the best he can. Some of the people I've talked to have said that he's getting fed up with it a little bit. And that's, as to be expected, honestly. If you're Mike McCarthy, you're trying to get everything right. You're trying to get all your ducks aligned. It took until mandatory minicamp for Micah Parsons to get there. Again, he didn't have to be there, but I just feel like Mike McCarthy now is starting to feel a little bit of pressure, trying to save his job, trying to get everybody in there to sort of get this message out there that, guys, we have to come in here, we have to get this season right. Not just all solely on him to just save his job, but because he feels the pressure. He obviously wants to get this team back into winning ways, but it isn't just lining up. It almost seems like the rest of the organization is on a different page. They're on a different sort of planet right now, and what their goals are with this year, with the lack of activity, and with so much uncertainty, with so many different, vantage points and points of view on this whole situation. You have Mike McCarthy trying to be a little bit more intense about everything. Then you have Jerry Jones, the whole organization not really being too incentivized to go out there and try to get all these pieces. Again, the salary cap is a major issue. Of course, I know that is a major hurdle in trying to bring people in if you just don't have the room to do it. But again, that's their fault. That's their fault for not extending Dak earlier. That's their fault for waiting until the last possible minute to extend CeeDee, Dak, and now you have Michael Parsons coming down the line as well. You can sort of feel bad for them, but at the same time, you sort of lay in the bed that you set. I hope I said that right. I hope I said that saying right. You lay in the bed that you made. That sounds better. You lay in the bed that you made, essentially, is what I'm trying to say with the Dallas Cowboys. And when will we potentially see a tipping point, right? Because now it seems like the tensions are starting to boil a little bit. You're starting to see a little bit of animosity just within from the Dallas Cowboys sources. When could we see a potential tipping point in this whole situation? Because I feel like it's only a matter of time. If they head into 2024, they still haven't re-signed anybody. Maybe one of the stars hold out. Maybe, I don't think Dak will hold out, but maybe CeeDee Lamb holds out of training camp. Then you have to deal with all of that for the next few months. Then during the season, you have guys on different pages. You have the offense not really looking well. If everyone's not up to speed on the offense, the defense, like I mentioned, looks different. And maybe you're not performing as dominantly as you would. There's going to be some rough moments, I feel, in this regular season compared to other regular seasons where we've seen the Cowboys just steamroll everybody, finish first in the NFC East, get a high seed, and then still lose. I feel like this year it's going to be a little different. There's going to be some more bad results in there. Just based on the actions that we've seen from them getting nobody really in free agency. They brought back Zeke. They brought in Eric Hendricks. But really, that's not going to do it. That's not going to move the needle, especially when you have the Eagles going out and getting Saquon, re-signing all their players so they don't have to worry about that anymore. The Commanders got a lot better. I liked what they did. The Giants lost big pieces, obviously, but even them, I feel like they did all right by adding John Runyon, Malik Neighbors, also Brian Burns. They're at least doing something. There's some action there. With the Cowboys, it just seems like I'm looking at that meme that everybody sees, that I see on Instagram, on social media, with the guy just like poking at something on the ground with a stick, saying like, is it alive yet? Or do something. That we're waiting for the Cowboys to finally make a move or show some action, but they're not doing it, and that can seem frustrating. I can imagine only with Mike McCarthy coming down to the wire, trying to succeed in his final season, but not getting anything, no response from the Dallas Cowboys, and it does seem unfair. It does seem just not an ideal situation for all aspects of it. Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys, and not only that, you could just sense that there are big changes coming after this season. Nothing is lining up as it should with a functional, well-executed team up until this point, and if no extensions get done, it'll be a huge distraction, like I mentioned, and it'll also just be a much bigger deal because this is the Dallas Cowboys we're talking about. Everything is blown out of proportion. All the cameras are always on them. It's going to get annoying, and I would probably guess by November, October, if they're around 500, which I probably would guess that they are, and they're coming down the wire, trying to get some big wins to solidify themselves in the playoffs. If that doesn't go well, and they perform badly towards the end of the season, that's when we're going to see some pretty blunt responses, and then after that, it's going to get to a point where I feel like nobody will really care to say how they're truly feeling, and then it just really becomes a whole mess from that point on. I can already predict it, but again, hopefully it doesn't turn out as bad as I'm maybe making it seem, but I just don't like the way that this is all turning out for the Cowboys because they've been right there, and it almost just seems like they're overly confident that they're always going to be there, they're always going to be around the rim, they're always going to be successful, where they've not really shown the actions to show that consistency over and over again. They've just been stuck in the same place, and now they could have a chance to potentially take a massive step backwards by trying to find a new head coach, maybe a new quarterback, and trying to replace a lot of pieces on this team. So a massive season coming up for the Cowboys. A lot riding on the plate of Jerry Jones, Mike McCarthy, and just the entire Dallas team. Like always, but I feel like this one has a lot more riding on it than usual. Let me know what you guys think about the Cowboys. What is the situation going to look like if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan? How are you feeling about your team heading into 2024? But speaking of the Dallas Cowboys, we're not going to go too far. Talking about Dallas, talking about some of these other teams, we're going to go to a quick break, and when we return, some more offseason grades, staying in the NFC East, and talking about all 4 teams and how they've done in the offseason up until this point. Now starting to pick it up a little bit heading into training camp. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now on the show to get into the third topic on today's show. Some more offseason gradings, this time in the NFC East. We just finished talking about the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, I'm not too high on them, but we're going to talk about some more of the teams, the Commanders, the Giants, and the Philadelphia Eagles, of course, and just give them an overall grade on how they've done this offseason. So, without further ado, we're going to start off with the New York Giants. As you see on your screen, I got the graphics this time, guys. I brought them back. It was working this time. So, I got this one up for you. The New York Giants, a C grade for the offseason for them. You know, big loss in Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney. I wasn't a big fan of that, honestly. When I saw that happen, and then just more details of how anything to try maybe re-signing with the Giants because they didn't offer him anything. So he was just left with his hands in the air, trying to find a new solution for him and signing with the Philadelphia Eagles. There's a lot of uncertainty almost everywhere with this team, how they handled the Saquon situation, also having more distractions, it seems like, on top of their quarterback situation with Daniel Jones. They already are, handcuffed to him because they gave him that massive extension. And because of that, now you have those rumors this offseason about looking for a new quarterback. They want to move on from him. Maybe they'll draft one this year. That probably won't sit too well with Daniel Jones. He had to answer questions about that already. Probably going to have to keep answering that at some points this regular season and next offseason as well. It also isn't great that he has $80 million guaranteed to that contract. So how they handled that, and now from where they were last offseason to where they find themselves this offseason, trying to make that change already, not sitting too well with me, as you would imagine. Then with how bad it might have looked with losing also Xavier McKinney. Again, I didn't like the way that it just happened. The way that they didn't franchise tag him, almost just giving up in a sense. The way that, again, they didn't franchise tag him. They didn't really extend him or didn't offer him too much to try and keep him. Not something I could have just sided with and just really been on the same side of it. So that didn't sit too well with me, but it wasn't all bad for them. I'm giving them a rough time, but they did do some things that I liked by signing John Runyon, signing Jermaine Illuminor to their offensive line. And after that, they traded for Brian Burns to add to that defensive line with Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence. The defensive line is looking all right. The defense is definitely looking a bit more secure. There's a lot more security with them, I feel like, instead of the offense because of Daniel Jones and his health. I think Malik Neighbors is going to be a stud, but again, the quarterback situation, how the offensive line develops, who's going to be the running back. I know Devin Singletary is there, but what sort of production are you going to get out of him? And who else is going to step up instead of Malik Neighbors? I think the Giants really didn't do too much, and the losses that they had this offseason outweigh the gains, the additions that they brought in. So for me, they get a C grade in my grading system for this offseason. But with that being said, we're going to move on to the next team, the Philadelphia Eagles. Addressed almost everything this offseason. They addressed everything, and they get a letter A grade for me. A letter A grade because I found it hard to pick out anything that they almost did wrong that I didn't really do right. You know, you look over some of the things that they got done this offseason. They brought in 2 new coordinators in Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. More experience there, more success out of those 2 guys compared to Brian Johnson and Sean Desai last year. So that should immediately make both sides of the ball a lot more reliable, I would use as the word. They also lost DeAndre Swift, but obviously they brought in Saquon Barkley to replace him, already upgrading there, as if they needed Saquon, really. Honestly, talking honestly, did they really need Saquon on this team? They went out and signed him, sticking it to the face of the New York Giants, just making it even sweeter for them. So that was a great power move. I love it. I love that they did that. I love the pettiness from it. But then, talking about their own, chores that they had to get done with their own players, they extended Jordan Mailata, they extended Landon Dickerson, extended A.J. Brown, extended Devontae Smith, all being there for the next 5 years, aligning with the contracts of Saquon, with Jalen Hurts. Their core players, their game changers are all under contract for the foreseeable future. So they have all of that wiped off of their slate. They don't have to worry about it anymore. And in free agency, they brought in some good players that I really liked in Devin White, addressing a major hole that they had at linebacker, C.J. Gardner-Johnson to line him up alongside Reed Blankenship, another great player that they had in 2022 when they made the Super Bowl. He went on to the Detroit Lions, but luckily for them, they brought him back, which is going to be a major help for them. They also, in free agency, I guess would be my only real doubt about the Eagles, they essentially let go of Hassan Reddick and brought in Bryce Huff the other way from the New York Jets. Hassan Reddick went to the Jets, so it was almost like a trade, but technically they signed him and released those 2 players. So with Huff, I'm not really too sure how much he can contribute right away. Compared to Hassan Reddick, it gives me a little bit of doubt there. So that's really the only thing. And then when you talk about the NFL draft also, adding Quinyon Mitchell, how he fell to them is remarkable, that they scooped him up in the first round, and also drafting Cooper DeJean to help out that secondary. And even later on in the draft, I like that they brought in Will Shipley, the running back, and also the linebacker Jeremiah Trotter for the personal reason that his dad played there, and also that I thought he was going to be a great player coming out of the draft there. So it's hard to pick out something that they did completely wrong. They addressed everything, and now they have a lot of pressure on them because they did everything right. They have the roster now. How are they going to plan out and execute in 2024? They've given themselves a good chance of doing it, but we just have to see how that all lays out. But getting into the next team, the third team on my list, the Washington Commanders, a B+ this offseason for a lot of changes that they made, not just on the roster and the personnel level, but the owner, Josh Harris, coming in, a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator. I think Jack Del Rio is also new. I could be wrong, but I think he might have been there last year. But regardless of that, a lot of changes from top to bottom throughout that whole organization. They brought in a whole new group of players, a whole new identity, some new ideas to try and finally flip this organization and finally get some success out of them, because I really like Dan Quinn coming in here. He has been overdue to get another head coaching job opportunity, and now he gets it with the Commanders, and he's going to have to play the Dallas Cowboys, but I think he's done a great job so far of bringing in the players that he would want. Also with Cliff Kingsbury, a good offensive mind, having success with Kyler Murray in Arizona. Now I think we'll have similar success with a similar skill set in Jaden Daniels, and along those lines, drafting Jaden Daniels, while he might have been a no-brainer, you would be surprised how many teams screw up one of those early picks. You've seen it before with number 1 overall draft pick busts and number 2 picks that didn't really pan out. You see it all the time, more often than you would really know, honestly. But Jaden Daniels was a great pick for them. A guy that can be the face of your franchise going forward, have so much success with this team. I love that they drafted him. And on the free agent side of things, they added so many players that just really reinvigorates this team and their identity, with bringing in Dorrance Armstrong on the defensive side of the ball, Tyler Biotic, Nick Allegretti, Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, Austin Eckler, Jeremy Chin, all these guys that might not pop out right away, but they're solid pieces that you always would love to have on this team. Bobby Wagner might be a little bit on the older side for some people. Some may believe that can he really make that big of an impact? This is one of the greatest linebackers we've seen in recent memory in the last decade. So I think he still has something in the tank, at least to bring from a leadership standpoint. Frankie Louvu is another one. That's a great piece to have in there. Austin Eckler, while he might have a different image about him, a different role, he will still contribute to this team because they need dynamic playmakers like him in any aspect that they could get them. So that's great for them. On the negative side a little bit, where I felt they could have done more, bringing in somebody to replace Kendall Fuller a little bit, not adding another defensive back could come back to bite them. And also, like I mentioned, not adding another wide receiver to complement Brandon Aiyuk. While that's still in the works, I think complement Terry McLaurin with Brandon Aiyuk is what I was trying to say. Bringing in Brandon Aiyuk, I think it's going to happen. There's too much smoke around it to not happen, in my opinion. The trade, what the Commanders give up for it will be interesting, but I think that is almost getting solidified with this team. And if they add someone of that caliber to Terry, this team is going to be very good. It's going to surprise a lot of people. I truly believe that. And the Commanders for right now get a B+ because they haven't done that big trade like I just finished talking about. If they did, they probably would have been an A or an A-. So they get a B for right now. But in saying that, the last team I will talk about, like I just finished talking about, the Dallas Cowboys, a D+ for the Cowboys. They haven't done anything. They have not done anything in this offseason. The salary cap, I know, is the main reason. They feel handcuffed by it. But again, that's their doing. That's their problem. That's the problem that they've sort of piled up on themselves because they haven't got these extensions done. And now you don't have enough money to sign anybody else. You brought in Eric Hendricks, Tony Pollard, and I want to see somebody else that's just slipping my mind. But regardless, it's only about 3 or 4 players, and it's not going to be enough when everybody else seems to be at least doing something, trying to get better, and the Dallas Cowboys are just sitting there because they haven't allowed themselves to because of the salary cap. And now a lot of uncertainty with Dak, like I mentioned, with CeeDee, with the offensive line, running back, a new defensive coordinator, new ideas coming in. How is it just going to pan out with the defense? I don't think it's going to be as smooth as people would have thought, regardless of how talented they still are. It seems like there's too much dysfunction on the other parts of the organization that it seems like it is just piling over now in 2024, more so than it has in the last few seasons. They still have a lot of talent, like I mentioned, but have done the least in this division and have the most to lose, in my opinion, with all the pressure that's always on them, all the media attention. Everyone is just waiting for this moment to kill the Cowboys and sort of tell them, we told you so. This was never going to happen. What can go wrong will go wrong. All the things you hear, people are just waiting to see it happen. And I think now the Dallas Cowboys, unfortunately for them, have given everybody the best chance of seeing them now crash and burn this season because of all the wrongdoings. And they get a D+ grade because of that. Maybe could have been lower. I wanted to be a little bit nicer here and have them at least some hope because, they still have great players, CeeDee and Dak, at least playing out the last year of their deals. But hopefully they get one of them extended. But for right now in this offseason, with the lack of activity, we get a D+ for the Dallas Cowboys. And that'll do it. That'll wrap it up for the offseason grades in the NFC East. Leave your thoughts in the comment section during the show or after the show on what you guys thought of the grades, and maybe I was too harsh on one team. Maybe I wasn't harsh enough on one of these teams. Let me know all your thoughts, like I mentioned, down below. But that'll wrap it up for that segment. We're going to head into another break, and when we return, more topics to talk about. Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, the quarterback battle going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. What is it going to look like? Why do some people believe Russell Wilson is ahead of Justin Fields at this current moment? And also, a discussion point to bring up here on today's show. Is Jalen Hurts a top 15 quarterback? Somebody in the media has serious questions about that. I'm going to get to it and give my thoughts on it when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back here to the show. Heading into our next segment, one of the most anticipated battles, position battles in this year's offseason, heading now into training camp, is the quarterback battle between the Steelers, between Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Up until this point, it seems like everyone around the Steelers, all the sources, see Russell Wilson, why he is in the prime position to be the starter. And speaking of some of those sources, Steelers reporter Mike McCarthy of The Athletic recently spoke on 93.7 The Fan, the Pittsburgh sports radio station, and he sort of explained how he saw it from his point of view, being boots on the ground, just getting some other reports from other people around him, why he sees Justin Fields at this point still trailing behind Russell Wilson so far from what he has seen and what he has heard so far through OTAs and in mandatory minicamp. One of the things he brought up was he said he could make some crazy throws, talking about Justin Fields, where you're like, wow, that's impressive. Then all of a sudden you see one, he overshoots it by 30 yards or underthrows it. You're like, what's going on here? Points out to the athleticism being very impressive, but the mechanics, the little things, the nuances, the footwork of being a quarterback, going through your progressions, all of that is still in the works for Justin Fields, and you would imagine that's the case. He is younger. I want to say he's about 25, 26, maybe max years old, so not really fully developed up until this point. He's still working through some of those things out, but athletically, you can see why there is that draw, why there are the oohs and ahs when Justin Fields escapes the pocket. Maybe he takes off for a 20-yard run. Maybe he makes a great throw on the run. Those things seem to be a little bit more developed for Justin Fields, but the more boring things, the fundamentals of it still need their work, where Russell Wilson has a lot more years of experience perfecting those sort of things up until this point. But another Steelers reporter, Ray Fittipaldo, a beat reporter for the Pittsburgh Steelers, said that fans shouldn't make too big of a deal right now that Fields is having some accuracy issues. It isn't ideal, obviously, with seeing some of the bad things, the negative things from OTAs, but I'm sure there's been a ton of positives. And again, we're only still in the period where it is in shorts and t-shirts. Nothing too serious. Once you get into training camp, which is why I'm anticipating it a lot more, being a Steelers fan, seeing them actually play out some of these game-like situations in pads and getting a little bit more contact out there, that's really where we're going to see some more development, a clearer picture around this quarterback battle. I would probably agree that Russell Wilson should be in the pole position right now because he is more experienced. He just has more years on Justin Fields, and he's been in a lot better situations than Justin Fields. Obviously, winning a Super Bowl, having the success he did in Seattle, and while he might not be coming off of the best situation with the Denver Broncos, he had a better season last year, not only than Justin Fields statistically, but better than all the quarterbacks that the Pittsburgh Steelers had combined. So it doesn't really surprise me up until this point, but this next point that Mark Kaboly added on makes me ponder about this whole situation long term about the Steelers quarterbacks because, before I mentioned that, Ray Fittipaldo brought up some more points around Justin Fields entering a new team, obviously a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback coach. It is likely that, in his words, that Pittsburgh is tinkering with his game a little bit right now, not truly ready for July just yet. They are messing around with it, getting him to try different things and trying to fine-tune those little nuances, the footwork, the hitch he has, the drop back, and all those little things. They're fine-tuning that right now, and Pittsburgh has an opportunity now to try and work that out right now while he's still young, while he's still on a one-year contract for potentially the long term, which brings me to my next point that Mark Kaboly added on to his previous statement where he said, it's just going to take time to coach him up and get him more comfortable with the mechanics for the whole thing. That's what this offseason's for. That's what this training camp is for. That's what this preseason's for, is to see if he can switch things around, be more consistent, then he could easily be the franchise quarterback here. That really sat with me because I feel like most people think that this is a one-year deal. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to try them out, and if it doesn't work out, they don't really lose anything. But for some reason, in some quotes that I see from Mark Kaboly, from other sources around it, reporting on this situation, reporting on this quarterback battle, it seems like more people are talking about the Steelers are working with Justin Fields, working to develop him, working to work out his mechanics, fixing some little things about his game, almost like they have a long-term plan already set for him. But he's still on that one-year deal, and people are bringing up these questions like, are we going to see enough Justin Fields for the Pittsburgh Steelers to re-sign him? I think with what we're hearing from some of these reporters, from some of the sources close to the Pittsburgh Steelers, not that the decision is made already, but it seems like it is heading towards a place where the Steelers would want to keep him, more so, dare I say, more so than Russell Wilson right now, because they're really investing a lot of time to develop him, make him the best he can be, and ideally, I am assuming the way that this all planned out in the Steelers' head, you heard it from their general manager, Omar Khan, that he himself didn't even expect to have this level of talent in the quarterback room, and the fact that they do, now I'm sure they're giddy about it, they're very excited about it, but I think it comes to a point where the Steelers have been down this road of trying to find a new quarterback, drafting one, Kenny Pickett, obviously that didn't work out, trying out Mason Rudolph, signing another one in Mitchell Trubisky. All of those have catastrophically failed in the last few seasons, and now they have a good chance here with Justin Fields, a first-round, very talented, very physically gifted quarterback that they've never really had a build like this before. They've never had this type of quarterback so athletic, being able to run, use his legs. At least in recent years, it has been more of a stationary quarterback. And Justin Fields is still in a very raw phase where he still needs to work out all these little things. But it seems, compared to how people talk about Russell Wilson, that it seems like this year is Russell Wilson's year. You know, almost that bridge quarterback like you typically see. And they're going to really work with Justin Fields to figure out his mechanics, all the little things to when he does play. Maybe he gets thrown out there at some point this season. That's still a possibility. But it seems like they're really planning for the future with him. And it almost pans the question and puts the question out there, you know, of how confident are any of you guys that this is a long-term situation with Justin Fields. You know, it goes beyond just this season because he is on that fifth-year deal. Russell Wilson is only signed for 1 year. Both essentially just rentals, but you can't play both of them, right? If you have two quarterbacks, you really don't have a quarterback at all if you're indecisive on who really is the number one guy. It seems to me, the way that Mark Kaboly is panning it out, the way some of these other sources are panning it out, that Justin Fields really has the Steelers thinking about making him the long-term guy past this year. Maybe he won't see the field too often, ideally, because that's what they brought Russell Wilson in for, obviously, to carry them, be an instant switch, an instant solution right here, right now in this year, because they have a very talented roster. You ride out Russell Wilson as far as you can, as successful as you can, hopefully, and then maybe for salary cap reasons, for other reasons on top of that, you don't bring him back, and by that point, Justin Fields, you feel confident enough in him that you're going to re-sign him, that you're going to have him on your team long-term, because I don't think the Steelers want to go down that path again in trying to find another quarterback. I think they have something very special here with Justin Fields. I might be overhyped about it. I might be too optimistic about Justin Fields in some of your guys' mind, but it just seems like a very ideal situation, too good to be true for the Steelers to not take advantage of this and ride it out. Maybe they only give him a 3-year deal. It doesn't have to be a 4 or 5-year deal. And on top of that, it's most likely going to be cheaper because Justin Fields doesn't really have too much leverage to ask for. Forget what all these other quarterbacks are making. Probably not to ask for too much more than 30 or around that sort of price tag for another contract, for a 3-year deal or something like that. So that is why I feel like the Steelers are looking at this situation sort of differently. And it doesn't come to the fact that, oh, Justin Fields is so far behind Russell Wilson up until this point. I think it is that way on purpose because the Steelers are planning long-term for Justin Fields to be their number one quarterback eventually, not so much this year, but in 2 years, 3 years from now. I feel pretty confident in that. It isn't something to write too much into at this point, but that is how it stands. Maybe Justin Fields impresses everybody in training camp, who knows, but for right now, I don't take it as such a groundbreaking thing to talk about, more so than Justin Fields starting to favor the Steelers as their long-term number one quarterback. But that's just what I think. I would love to know what you guys think about the situation. Who would you rather have at quarterback this season and going forward, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields? Leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. But that takes us to the last segment, sticking with quarterbacks from Justin Fields and Russell Wilson to Jalen Hurts now. Back to the NFC East, back to talking about the Eagles. Is Jalen Hurts a top 15 quarterback? I have some stats to bring up, some interesting quotes from Nick Wright, a Fox analyst, and just my overall final verdict on Jalen Hurts and how this season is pivotal for him to get back to solidifying himself as a top quarterback in the NFL. So stick around and listen to that conversation when we return in just a few seconds. We are back here now for the last segment on today's show. A lot of quarterback talk on today's episode, but we're going to continue that here with Jalen Hurts. Is Jalen a top 15 quarterback in the NFL right now, currently as we stand? Last season might not be a great inclination that he is in that conversation, but it is crazy because I feel like people talk about Jalen like last year, he had an awful year. It feels like everyone talks to him in that light, like his year last year was one of the worst in just the NFL in general, not just in his career as a whole. But if you look at some of the numbers that I went back and just compared from 2022 and 2023, you would be pretty surprised, at least I was pretty surprised to see how the numbers panned out here for Jalen. If you look at your screen, and I'll also talk about it here on my sheet, that Hurts in 2022 and Jalen Hurts in 2023, you look at the numbers and they're pretty comparable, pretty similar, but obviously the end result wasn't as many people would have expected. The completion percentage was basically the same. The yards in 2022, he had 3,701 passing yards and 760 rushing yards. One of the best years he has had overall, obviously in 2022 when they made the Super Bowl. Great numbers there. Then in 2023, he had more passing yards at 3,858, but the rushing numbers went down a little bit, only at 605, but we're talking about running back 2, running back 3 sort of numbers with that amount of yards. Getting that from your quarterback on top of having a great rushing game, they're not really that bad if you're just looking at it and comparing it in that way. 22 touchdowns to 13 rushing touchdowns in 2022. And then in 2023, more passing touchdowns by just 1 and 15 rushing touchdowns in 2023. So both of those numbers went up. Again, not really buying too much into this idea that he was really bad last year, but the interceptions is where the main problem shows up, right? 6 interceptions in 2022, a little bit less, or a little bit more careless, I should say, in 2023 with 15 interceptions, and the QBR dropped from 68.3 to 60.1 in those 2 years. But I think the carelessness, the interceptions, at some point, it is bad, obviously, seeing your quarterback throw an interception, but it was the way that he threw some of them. It seemed like very different ideas of what the play should be, very different perspective on what A.J. Brown, what sort of route he was running, what Devontae Smith was doing. It seemed like a lot of finger pointing and a lot of just shoulder shrugging at some of the plays where they're left confused as to why they ran that sort of route, or why did Jalen throw it at this point and not where I thought he was going to throw it. So those sort of things that I think really come down to the idea of the coordinators and really more so the game planning, more so than just Jalen Hurts being an average or a bad quarterback. The numbers sort of show differently other than the interceptions, basically still the same numbers he put up in the year that he went to the Super Bowl. So what more can we dig out of this? What more can we get from this information that gets us to an answer on whether Jalen Hurts is a top 15 quarterback or not? Most people, like me, believe this year is a big year for Jalen Hurts. I feel like after he had last year and how people talk about it compared to 2022, this year just becomes that much more significant for him. There's been a little bit more doubt creeping in from all people in what, especially with more talent on this offensive now, more pressure added on because you don't really have too many excuses to point to, oh, the receivers aren't good enough, the running back isn't good enough. Now you have better offensive coordinator and a better defensive coordinator coming in as well. So again, where are people going to look towards if nothing is really going as it should? It's going to be mainly Jalen Hurts on the player side, and I think Nick Sirianni, but that's a different conversation. Howard Eskin, a Philadelphia sports anchor and a radio personality for Philadelphia as well, shared a similar thought when he said he needs to have a good year or they're going to Carson Wentz him. He's got to have a good year and he can't make excuses. Just go out there and be the best player you can be. And similarly to that sentiment, I share or I side more with that statement from Howard Eskin. I can see that one being a little bit more accurate than the quote from Nick Wright, a Fox analyst and a personality on First Things First, when he said, I actually have the quote that I will pull up for you guys to see. There it is. Nick Wright on Fox is First Things First. He said, I do think it's a legitimate conversation of, do we know Jalen Hurts is good? Are we certain Jalen Hurts is a top 15 quarterback in the league? There's only 32, so are we certain he's better than the average league starter? Which the sentiment, the statement just from that itself is crazy to me, is nuts. The disrespect shown to Jalen Hurts after last year, where it's not like the Eagles missed the playoffs, or it's not like they went like 9-8 or 8-10 or something like that. They were, for the most part, they were 12-1 at one point, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was towards the end of the year where obviously you don't want that to happen, but they were not awful by any means. And like the numbers that I just showed up on the screen showed, Jalen didn't have an awful year. It looked worse, and it seemed worse because the wheels sort of fell off in the last 5 to 7 weeks there in the regular season. But on top of that, to say that he's not a top 15 quarterback or question it, or question the fact that he's better than the average league starter is nuts. It's disrespectful to Jalen, because comparing him to an average quarterback, no average quarterback can do what Jalen Hurts does for the Philadelphia Eagles. Everybody thinks the tush push and those sort of things that they have Jalen Hurts do are super easy. Everybody could do that. Oh, you're only getting pushed 1 yard. That's a free touchdown every time. No, everybody could do that. Not everybody can do that. We saw Patrick Mahomes do it one time and his knee bent back the other way. Not every quarterback can do it. And Patrick Mahomes is a very athletic guy, a very good quarterback, the best quarterback probably, arguably ever. And some of the quarterbacks aren't just built to do that over and over and over again. He fits this team very well, ideally, perfectly, you can even say, and no average quarterback can bring you the rushing numbers that Jalen can, the threat in the backfield now with Saquon Barkley and that offensive line. And in the Super Bowl, he had arguably a top 3, top 2 performance in terms of stats. I don't have the stats pulled up, but you guys can go look at those stats that he had in the Super Bowl, going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes, battling it out. And if it wasn't for that one fumble, they had a great shot to win. They still had a great shot to win, but it didn't turn out in the end. And to me, the idea of questioning Is he top 15? He's definitely top 15. He's probably top 12, maybe top 10. There's a lot of good quarterbacks, but Jalen is not outside of the top 15. There's no chance that's true. But to me, the idea where everyone's getting these doubts from, maybe overestimating it, is the fact that the offensive coordinator changes so much from Sean Steichen to Brian Johnson and now again to Kellen Moore. And that's really where it stems for me with Jalen Hurts not having a steady knowledge of the same system year in and year out. He's had to change twice already, and that, no matter how good you are as a quarterback or who you are as a quarterback, learning a whole new offensive playbook takes some time. You're going to have some hiccups down the road, and that's part in what we see from Jalen Hurts, but also not to shield him from any blame. He does still have a lot of pressure on him now, like I mentioned, more than ever because of this team being so stacked, having nowhere else to look outside of him, because he has been there since this whole thing really started with Nick Sirianni. Both of them essentially came in at the same time, and they've been there the longest compared to Saquon, AJ, and Devontae Smith. So the looks and the blame are going to go right to them. And again, you have no excuses. I share the same sentiment as Howard Eskin from that point, but to go as far and say that he's not a top 15 quarterback, I think that's crazy. The offensive coordinator changes have definitely hindered him a little bit, but I think he's done a great job of learning it on the fly and having the level of success that he's had with the roster that he has. You know, he can't control that. In general, just speaking here to close out this segment, if Howie Roseman is one of the best executives of all time, and they do a great job of bringing in good people, Jalen's not going to say no to that, obviously. He's going to bring them in, have a great roster, and just be successful with them as anybody else would. You know, that's just out of his control. And to sort of relinquish these talks and get everybody to stop doubting him so much, I think this year, with all the pieces in place now, ideally he has to be somewhere in the conversation of an MVP. He is that talented, I believe. He has the skill set to be in those conversations. Ideally, he has to be in the MVP talks, and to really do a good job, he has to bring this Philadelphia Eagles team to at least the NFC Championship game. I'm not holding any punches. I think at least the NFC Championship game for this team as a whole. And if you get to the Super Bowl again, nobody's going to be surprised because of this roster. They have to be very successful, Jalen on a personal level and as a team, to really silence the naysayers and get everybody to stop questioning you being better than an average quarterback. That's crazy. He is definitely better than that. I think the Eagles will have a bounce-back year this year. I'm excited to see it with so many good players on this team, but let me know what you guys think. Please don't tell me any of you guys think Jalen is not a top 15 quarterback, but leave your guys' thoughts in the comments section down below. But with saying that, that'll wrap it up for today's show. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and remind you guys to please like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on all forms of social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok as well. If you want to see more of this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for more forms of the content around the NFL coming to you guys on both of those channels. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more football discussions and NFL conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me. I'll see you guys back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great.